This is Botswana. Sadly, most African countries experienced some of their most horrifying moments between the mid-19th and late-19th centuries. However, for a select few, it was both a roller coaster ride and a time of success. Botswana had the world's fastest economic growth rate from 1965 to 1995. This kind of success would not be expected in a region like Africa. Many people have been perplexed by Botswana's spectacular success. The most surprising aspect was that they only gained independence in 1966. However, Botswana's prospects were bleak. After all, Botswana is a landlocked country with an unimpressive track record. Botswana's development was hampered not only by geography. Botswana experienced a severe lack of human capital following its independence. How did Botswana manage to become the world's fastest growing economy? You are just about to find out. The story began in 1965. At that time, their population was estimated to be almost 560,000. Over 72% of Botswana's citizens over the age of 25 had no formal education. At the time, only about 24% of their youth over the age of 25 had received primary schooling, and only 0.1% of citizens over 25 had completed tertiary education. According to reports, only 22 people in Botswana were university graduates. Western education was like an expense asset to own. A low number of 100 citizens had completed secondary school. Despite these challenges, Botswana has emerged as an African hope. Examining Botswana's history reveals that the performance of its pre-colonial establishments had shed light on the country's post-colonial success. Mechanisms devised by the Swana tribe served as a shield against tyranny in pre-colonial Botswana. Compared to other African tribes, the Botswana pre-colonial establishment sought to limit chiefs' authority. Even though they had the final say, their chiefs could not decide or impose a law without consulting their traditional assembly, known as the Gadla. As a result, when contrasted to other African ethnic groups, Swana culture fostered dissent. Furthermore, and communal property rights coexisted in pre-colonial Botswana. Unoccupied land, for example, served a communal function, though the chief had a right to relocate it to tribe members for agricultural purposes. On the other hand, customary law mandated private property rights, allowing for buildup and ownership of personal belongings and livestock. In short, the collaborator of pre-colonial institutions clearly aided Botswana's rise by preventing officials from exercising unchecked power. However, as Scott Bowler demonstrates in his critique of the institutional argument, institutions cannot tell the entire story. If the inclusive pre-colonial institutions effectively constrained elites, why did Botswana perform so poorly before independence? Botswana was the third poorest nation in the world before its independence. Botswana's success in terms of institutional policy has sparked many questions from inquiring minds. So, if institutions are so important, how come they are unable to stimulate economic growth in pre-colonial Botswana? The answer to this question has not hit the satisfaction of the people asking them. Botswana's economic growth has an understory between economic and political institutions. Political institutions facilitate growth, whereas economic institutions promote growth. That is, political institutions can promote growth by moving out of the way of private actors and protecting peaceful capital accumulation from both private and state thieves. To be fruitful, political institutions must prevent the state from usurping resources. However, if growth is totally absent due to the primitive influence of economic institutions, safeguarding private property is not particularly beneficial in terms of growth. Pre-colonial economic institutions remain primitive in Botswana, and Valentine Seidler captures the anti-growth style of institutions in pre-colonial Botswana. Pre-colonial Swana trade was typical of substance-based economy. Typically, surplus goods were traded in the markets. We do not know of any enterprise-oriented production for markets. The market exchange was governed by personal relations among men. Intertribal trade usually needed the presentation of the trader before the goods of the receiving tribe could be exchanged. Relative prices had to be known by the market participants, which increased transaction costs. Botswana is currently ranked near the top of many governance indices, fueled by its institutional strength. It ranks 38th in the 2007 Transparency International Corruption Perceptions Index, which was the highest for an African country. Botswana later ranked third on the continent by the new Ibrahim Index of African Governance, ahead of its southern neighbor, South Africa. According to the World Bank's Doing Business 2008 report, Botswana ranks 4th in sub-Saharan Africa, and even in the upper third of countries globally. Botswana has thus far managed to avoid the drawbacks of the so-called resource curse, in which many African countries end up squandering their gains in natural resources. However, its economic strength is still largely dependent on diamonds. Over the last decade, diamond mining accounted for roughly 1/3 of the total GDP. The diamond trade generated $2.9 billion in 2004. This revenue enabled the Botswana government to become the largest employer in the world. A lopsided economy, on the other hand, is unstable. The country's diamond resources are expected to be depleted in about 25 years, so its GDP will suffer significantly unless the Botswana economy diversifies. Botswana saw the development of the agricultural and mining sectors during the pre-colonial era. As the economy was remodeled in the post-independence period, the relatively mild nature of Botswana's historical political institutions had become critical, as reflected in the government's commitment to investors. Innovators had a reason to invest because the property seizure risk was low. The logic of the story is that economic institutions failed to achieve the maximum yield of their economic transactions in the pre-colonial era. As a result, political institutions were less potent in cultivating growth, despite their primary role is to enable growth by building a predictable economic environment. Botswana's government dismissed anti-white sentiments that spread across the region and in some other African countries in the 1970s. Botswana opened its arms to South African and Zimbabwean refugees, who contribute significantly to the economy. According to Scott Bollier, other countries could have ended up like Botswana if they had better leaders. Every African nation could have turned out like Botswana, but most newly elected leaders chose reform paths that were not conducive to long-term growth. Khama, by contrast, made good policy decisions during Botswana's post-colonial transition. This wise choice made by Khama has kept Botswana on a growth path for more than 30 years. Before going any further, don't forget to like and subscribe to our channel, Technoglobal Innovation. Let's return to the video. How did Botswana handle the realization of its diamond depletion? It's no longer surprising that 2020 was a global terror year. Following the worldwide adoption of a travel ban to combat coronavirus spread, every country and all activities saw an unprecedented drop in demand for non-essential commodities. In light of this, Botswana's president, Mokgweetsi Masisi, has called for the diversification of the country's diamond-dependent economy, which has suffered a massive decline due to the pandemic. The president didn't mince words when he stated that it is more imperative than ever for Botswana to develop and expand into exploring other natural resources, such as gold and base metals, following a woeful year for the diamond market, which has harmed government revenue. He also stated that Botswana must reduce its reliance on precious stones because the pandemic has injured the global diamond trade. Furthermore, the country will work to develop other minerals, such as coal. Botswana is said to be blessed with an estimated 212 billion tons of coal deposits. Despite a truly admirable economic track record, it continues to face certain obstacles that directly impact its people. Every concerned and credible government must consider factors other than international rankings and perceptions. Botswana's government is uneasy about the country's economic imbalance. Botswana's poorly developed agricultural sector is the most noticeable imbalance. This has resulted in unequal income distribution and asset ownership, food shortages, and inadequate water supply due to endemic declines in cereal crop production. The government has worked tirelessly to encourage people to look for ways to develop the agricultural sector and restore it to its former glory. In the future, the Botswana government may wish to consider partnership with private players in these critical areas in order to address its socio-economic needs, reduce reliance on other countries, create more jobs, and raise living standards and GDP. To assist private players, the government is attempting to tweak some policies so that they slightly favor the empowerment of interested investors and private players. It is unknown how much contribution the government will allow foreign investors to make to the agricultural sector. Still, people are optimistic that they will keep up the good work and always put the national interest ahead of individual interests. Furthermore, even though SMEs in Botswana employ a significant portion of the working population and contribute significantly to overall development, the market is not competitive enough. The government requires more monetary policies that promote the stable growth of small and medium-scale businesses across the country. The nation is a member of several regional and international trade organizations, including the World Trade Organization, the South African Customs Union, the Southern African Development Community, and has signed trade treaties with the European Union and the U.S. Botswana has one of the most trade openness in sub-Saharan Africa. According to the most recent WTO data, Botswana has shipped out $4,262 million in goods in 2020, while it imported $6,516 million. In terms of service, the country imports $679 million and exports $486 million. As a result, the nation's economic trade balance in 2020 will be $2.4 million. Overall, imports increased by 4.3% over the previous year, while exports fell by 21.4%. Owing primarily to the negative effects of the pandemic on the international diamond trade, which significantly impacted Botswana's exports. Diamonds worth $4 billion, gold worth $87.2 million, insulated wire worth $81.9 million, bovine worth $46 million, and carbonates worth $40.1 million are the most recent exports. Botswana's top export destinations are Belgium, where they generate about $951 million, and the United Arab Emirates, where they make about $934 million. In India, they made $901 million, and in other African countries like South Africa and Singapore, they made about $851 million. The importance of the agricultural sector development cannot be overstated. Botswana consumes approximately 40,000 tons of fish annually, with only 300 tons produced locally and the remaining 3,700 tons imported from other countries. Efforts to increase fish production through aquaculture, such as building fish hatcheries to make fish seed for overfished reservoirs, are being investigated and could provide a niche in the market for incoming investors. The sector also supplies raw materials to Argo-based businesses such as tanning, oil, milling, meat processing, soap, and brewing. Each year, the U.S. Department of Agriculture's Foreign Agricultural Service in Pretoria sets up more than 50 reports on the agricultural situation in South Africa by the commodity sector. Some reports illustrate opportunities for agricultural exports from the United States, and this highlights reducing the impact of food shortage in Botswana. The success of Botswana teaches us that the past does not bind nations. Botswana, for example, can conquer colonial history and the curse of geography with the correct institutional framework and policies. While some African countries invest in blame games, Botswana made the most of the opportunities it presented and is now where it is. Botswana is the richest country in Africa and the world's fastest growing economy. If you like this video about Botswana, then make sure to watch any of the videos on our YouTube channel, Techno Global Innovations.